After my grandparents died in that horrific car crash, their lawyer called me in for a meeting that would change everything. I sat in that leather chair, my hands trembling, as he revealed I was the sole heir to their $26 million estate. The number didn't even feel real at first. 26 million. I kept repeating it in my head, trying to make sense of what it meant. My family's reaction was immediate and vicious. They demanded I hand over every cent. When I refused, they didn't just ask me to leave. They kicked me out that very night, treating me like a criminal who had stolen something that belonged to them. I had nowhere to go except my grandparents' house, the place that had always felt more like home than anywhere else. The next morning, they showed up at the front door with fury in their eyes, ready to evict me from what they believed should be theirs. But when they saw who was standing beside me, their faces went completely white. The shock, the fear, the sudden realization that they had miscalculated everything played across their features like a movie I would never forget. I am Natalie Foster. I'm 27 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was living a simple life as a kindergarten teacher. My studio apartment was tiny, barely 500 square feet, and I lived paycheck to paycheck like so many others in my profession. I clipped coupons, bought generic brands, and considered eating out at a chain restaurant a special treat. My car was older than some of my students, and my furniture came from thrift stores and garage sales. But I was happy. I loved my work, loved watching 5-year-olds discover reading and making friends. I found joy in the small things, the everyday moments that cost nothing but meant everything. My grandparents raised me in ways my own parents never did. While my mother and father provided the basics, food, shelter, clothes, they were emotionally absent in every way that mattered. My father, Richard, worked constantly, climbing that corporate ladder like it was the only thing that gave his life meaning. 60-hour weeks were standard. 70 wasn't unusual. He missed every single one of my school plays, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. My mother, Diane, spent her time networking with the right people, attending the right social events, making sure we looked successful to everyone who mattered in her carefully curated world. Family dinners were rare, maybe once a month if we were lucky. And when they did happen, my parents were distracted, checking their phones, taking work calls, planning their next social engagement. I would sit there, trying to tell them about my day, about the A I got on my science project, or the new friend I made at recess, and they would nod absently without really hearing a word I said. The loneliness of those dinners, of being physically present with people who were emotionally absent, carved something hollow inside me that took years to understand. From the time I was 5 years old, I spent every weekend with my grandparents. Not just Saturdays or Sundays, but both days, every single week. Summer vacations meant 3 months at their house. School breaks, holidays, any time I could escape the cold perfection of my parents' showcase home, I went to them. Their 4-bedroom house became my sanctuary, the place where I could breathe freely and be myself without judgment or expectation. Despite having significant wealth, my grandparents lived simply in ways that confused and frustrated my father. Their 3-acre property had a massive vegetable garden, where Grandpa Harold taught me everything about growing food. I learned to plant tomatoes, zucchini, green beans, and carrots. I learned about companion planting, about how marigolds keep pests away, and how basil makes tomatoes taste better. We would spend entire Saturday mornings in that garden, our hands covered in rich, dark soil, the sun warm on our backs. He taught me that good things take time, that you can't rush growth, that patience and consistent care produce the best results. Those lessons weren't just about vegetables. Grandma Elizabeth showed me how to bake cookies from scratch, measuring flour and sugar, creaming butter until it was light and fluffy, learning the exact moment to pull chocolate chip cookies from the oven so they were perfectly golden but still soft in the middle. She taught me to sew, not just buttons, but actual garments. We made doll clothes together when I was young, then a skirt for me when I was 12, and eventually a quilt that took us 2 years to complete. Every stitch represented time spent together, conversations about life and love and what really matters. They attended every school play my parents missed, which was all of them. They came to every soccer game, cheering from the sidelines, even when I spent most of the time on the bench. When I had my first art show in third grade, a small exhibition in the school library, my grandparents drove 40 minutes to see my crayon drawing of our family. My parents didn't come. They had a work function that couldn't be missed. But my grandparents stood in front of that drawing for 10 minutes, asking me about every detail, making me feel like I had created something worthy of the Louvre. My grandparents built their fortune from absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing. They started Alexander Logistics in their garage in 1973 with one truck, a dream, and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Grandpa Harold drove that truck himself for the first 5 years, making deliveries all over the region, sometimes sleeping in the cab to save money on hotels. Grandma Elizabeth handled all the paperwork, billing, scheduling, and customer service from a card table in their garage, often working until 2 or 3 in the morning. By the time I was born, Alexander Logistics had grown into a regional powerhouse. They had a fleet of 200 trucks, 5 warehouses across 3 states, and annual revenues in the tens of millions. They employed over 100 people directly and supported countless more through their business relationships. But you would never know any of this by looking at them or their lifestyle. Grandpa Harold drove the same pickup truck for 20 years. It was a 1985 Ford F-150, dark blue with rust spots on the wheel wells and a dent in the tailgate, from when he backed into a pole in 1992. The radio only worked on AM stations. The air conditioning gave up somewhere around 2005, and the passenger door stuck so badly you had to kick it to open it. But he loved that truck. He said it reminded him where he came from, kept him humble, kept him real. Grandma Elizabeth clipped coupons religiously. Every Sunday morning, she would sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper, scissors in hand, carefully cutting out deals on everything from dish soap to canned goods. She bought clothes on sale, shopped at outlet stores, and wore the same winter coat for 15 years because it was still perfectly functional. Their house, while comfortable and well-maintained, was modest. No marble countertops, no designer furniture, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Just a warm, lived-in home filled with books, family photos, and the smell of whatever delicious thing Grandma was cooking. They always told me the same thing, over and over, until it became part of my core beliefs. Money is just a tool, Natalie. It's not a measurement of your worth as a person. Use it to build something meaningful, not to impress people who don't matter. They live those words every single day. They donated anonymously to local charities, helped employees through difficult times without making a big deal about it, and treated everyone with the same respect, regardless of their position or wealth. This philosophy was exactly what created the massive rift with my father. As their only son, he grew up expecting to inherit everything and live the lavish lifestyle he felt entitled to. He resented their frugality deeply, calling them stingy, old-fashioned, and embarrassingly cheap. What they saw as character building, he saw as deprivation and punishment. The fights were legendary, explosive arguments that could be heard throughout the house. They paid for his college education completely, every cent of tuition, books, and housing at a good state university. But they expected him to work summer jobs, to learn the value of earning his own money. He hated it. He wanted to spend his summers traveling with friends, partying, enjoying the freedom of youth. Instead, he worked at a landscaping company, coming home exhausted and resentful, blaming them for ruining his college experience. When he graduated, they helped him with a down payment on a modest starter home, a nice 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood. But he wanted a luxury condo in the city, something flashy and impressive that would show everyone he had made it. The starter home felt like an insult to him, another example of their cheapness and lack of understanding about what success looked like in the modern world. The final break came when my father demanded a senior management position at Alexander Logistics, despite having absolutely no relevant experience. He had a business degree and had worked in corporate sales for a few years, but he knew nothing about logistics, transportation, or managing a company with hundreds of employees. My grandparents refused, telling him he needed to earn it like everyone else, start at the bottom, learn the business, prove himself capable. He was furious. He stormed out of their house screaming that they had never loved him, that they were holding him back out of spite, that they would regret treating him this way. He took a corporate job instead, working his way up through a series of companies, always chasing the next promotion, the next raise, the next status symbol. Their relationship was never the same after that. He visited maybe twice a year, always briefly, always with an agenda, usually asking for money. The warmth, whatever small amount had existed, was gone completely. With me, they took an entirely different approach. They paid for my education in full, allowing me to graduate from college completely debt-free. In a world where most of my friends were drowning in student loans, I walked across that stage with a diploma and zero financial burden. But they encouraged me to choose a career based on passion rather than profit, to find work that fulfilled me rather than just paid well. When I decided to become a kindergarten teacher, they were genuinely thrilled. My father was disgusted. My mother was embarrassed. But my grandparents beamed with pride. Throughout my adult life, I maintained a close, genuine relationship with them. We had standing Sunday dinners every single week without fail. I would arrive around 4 in the afternoon, and we would cook together, setting the table with the good china Grandma only used for family, talking about everything and nothing. Those dinners were sacred to me, the highlight of my week. We talked about books we were reading, movies we had seen, politics, philosophy, memories from their youth, my challenges at work, real conversations with people who actually listened and cared about my thoughts and feelings. I helped them navigate new technology as they got older. I set up their smartphones, showed them how to video chat so they could see me even when we couldn't be together physically. I taught them how to use email, how to shop online, how to look up information on the internet. They were eager learners, always curious, always wanting to stay connected to the changing world. I taught them their family recipes, writing down measurements and techniques that had always just been pinches and handfuls and cook until it looks right. We documented everything so those recipes wouldn't be lost. During holidays, I always stayed with them rather than at my parents' house. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, 4th of July, every single one. This caused endless friction with my mother, who saw it as a personal rejection, a public statement that I preferred them over her. She was right, of course. I did prefer them. They were kind, present, interested in my life. My parents were cold, distant, and only seemed to notice me when my choices embarrassed them or didn't align with their vision of success. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from my grandparents' home. It was small, just over 500 square feet, but it was mine. I filled it with secondhand furniture I had refinished myself, plants I nursed back to health from the clearance section at the hardware store, and books I collected from library sales. My salary at Sunshine Elementary School was modest, barely $32,000 a year, but it covered my needs. I found joy in simple pleasures, reading books from the library instead of buying them, hiking in the state park on weekends, volunteering at the animal shelter on Saturday mornings. My grandparents respected my independent lifestyle completely. They never criticized my choices or suggested I should want more. But they occasionally surprised me with practical gifts, things I needed but couldn't quite afford. New winter tires when mine were dangerously bald. A high-quality blender when mine finally died after years of service. A warm winter coat when they noticed mine was held together with safety pins. Never flashy gifts, never things meant to impress others. Just practical items that made my life a little easier, given with love and without any expectation of repayment or gratitude. 6 weeks ago, everything in my world shattered completely. I was sitting at my small kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, grading papers. Well, not really grading, kindergarteners don't get letter grades. I was writing encouraging comments on their drawings and checking off their progress on basic skills. The TV was on in the background, some sitcom I wasn't really watching. My phone rang at 8:47. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock, annoyed at the interruption. It was the police. A detective, actually. Her voice was gentle but professional as she told me there had been an accident. My grandparents had been driving home from Giuseppe's, their favorite Italian restaurant where they went every Tuesday night for the early bird special. They had the same table, the same waiter, the same orders. Grandpa always got the chicken parmesan. Grandma always got the eggplant rollatini. They shared a tiramisu for dessert. A drunk driver ran a red light at full speed, hitting their car directly on the driver's side. The detective said they died instantly, that they didn't suffer. She said it like it was supposed to be comforting, like the speed of death. Somehow made it better. It didn't. The fact that they went from enjoying dinner to being gone in a split second felt impossibly cruel. No goodbyes, no final words, no chance to tell them one more time how much I loved them. I don't remember much about the rest of that night. I know I called my parents. I know my father answered. I know I told him what happened. His response was oddly businesslike, asking about details like where the bodies were, what hospital, what funeral home. No emotion, no grief, just logistics. My mother got on the phone, crying dramatically, but it felt performative somehow, like she was playing the role of grieving daughter-in-law rather than actually feeling anything genuine. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences that felt hollow. I remember my parents taking charge of all the arrangements, arguing with the funeral director about costs, trying to negotiate down the price of the casket, the flowers, the service itself. My brother Jason flew in from California, where he was supposedly working on his latest startup. He spent most of the funeral on his phone, texting, scrolling through social media, barely present. Aunt Pam, my father's younger sister, cried dramatically whenever anyone was watching, but stopped the moment she thought no one was looking. Uncle Steve, her husband, just stood awkwardly in corners, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. None of them had visited my grandparents in years. Jason hadn't seen them since Christmas 3 years ago. Aunt Pam maybe came by once a year, always with some excuse about being too busy with her kids' activities. My parents visited on major holidays only, staying for exactly the minimum amount of time that wouldn't look bad. Yet suddenly, at the funeral, they were all acting like the grieving family, telling stories about my grandparents to people who actually knew them well, pretending they had been close. I felt numb through all of it. The two people who truly understood me, who supported me unconditionally, who made me feel valued and loved, were gone forever. Their house, once so warm and inviting, now stood empty and silent. I couldn't bring myself to go inside after the funeral. The thought of walking through those rooms without them there, of seeing Grandpa's reading glasses on the side table and Grandma's knitting basket by her chair, was too much. Instead, I returned to my tiny apartment, took bereavement leave from school, and tried to process a reality that felt impossible to accept. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Matthew Goldstein, my grandparents' attorney. His voice was kind but formal, as he requested that I, along with my immediate family, come to his office for the reading of the will. I had no idea what to expect. I assumed they had left me something, maybe a small amount of money or some personal items. I never imagined what was actually coming. The morning of the will reading dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matches grief perfectly. I arrived at Goldstein Legal 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress I had bought for the funeral. The office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather chairs that smelled like old books and furniture polish. The waiting room had tall windows with heavy drapes, original hardwood floors, and framed diplomas covering one wall. Matthew Goldstein greeted me with a gentle handshake. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. My grandparents had mentioned him often over the years, not just as their attorney, but as a genuine friend. They played chess together every month, had lunch regularly, and Grandma always sent him home with containers of her lemon bars. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Natalie," he said quietly, his hand warm and steady in mine. Elizabeth and Harold were extraordinary people. I'll miss our chess games and her lemon bars at our meetings. She always made an extra batch just for me. Said I looked too thin and needed feeding. His genuine emotion made my eyes well up immediately. Thank you, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. They spoke highly of you, too. Grandpa said you were the only lawyer he trusted completely, which was saying something. Before we could continue, the glass door swung open with unnecessary force. My family had arrived all at once, like a storm rolling in. My father, Richard, entered first, checking his expensive Rolex impatiently. At 56, he looked like an older, harder version of my grandfather, but without any of the warmth or kindness. His face was all sharp angles and permanent frown lines. My mother, Diane, followed, her designer handbag probably costing more than 3 months of my rent. She was dressed in black, but it was clearly an expensive outfit, perfectly tailored, with jewelry that caught the light. My 25-year-old brother Jason swaggered in wearing sunglasses indoors, which he seemed to think made him look cool and successful. His idea of business attire was a wrinkled button-up shirt, partially tucked into jeans that hung too low on his hips. Behind them came Aunt Pam, my father's younger sister, already talking loudly on her phone about some perceived slight from her country club friends. She was 52 but dressed like she was 30, in tight clothes and too much makeup. Uncle Steve trailed behind her like always, nodding politely to me but quickly averting his eyes when I tried to make contact. They had been married for 20 years, but I had rarely heard him speak more than a few sentences at any family gathering. "Well, let's get this over with," my father announced without bothering with greetings or condolences. "Some of us have actual businesses to run, important meetings to get back to. Time is money, Matt." Matthew smiled thinly, that professional smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Of course, Richard. Please, everyone, follow me to the conference room. We're all here now, so we can begin." The tension in the room was palpable as we settled around a large oak conference table that probably dated back to the 1800s. My father sat at one end as if claiming authority, positioning himself like he was running the meeting. I chose a seat near Matthew's position at the head of the table, feeling more comfortable close to the one person in the room who seemed genuinely kind. The others arranged themselves according to their usual family alliances. My mother sat next to my father, of course, their united front. Jason sprawled next to her, already looking bored and scrolling through his phone. Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve sat across from them, Pam checking her own phone constantly, Steve just staring at his hands. "Before we begin," Matthew said, adjusting his glasses and opening a leather portfolio, "I want to clarify that Elizabeth and Harold were of completely sound mind when they updated their will last year. They underwent extensive cognitive testing with multiple independent physicians. They were thorough in their considerations and explicit in their wishes. Everything was done properly, legally, and with clear intent." My father snorted dismissively. "Just read it, Matt. We know how this goes. Dad built the business. I'm his son. Standard inheritance procedure. The company goes to me, the house gets sold and divided, savings split up. Let's not drag this out unnecessarily." Matthew ignored the interruption completely, his face remaining professionally neutral. He began reading in his clear, measured voice. "I, Harold Alexander, and I, Elizabeth Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament, executed on the 15th day of March, 2024. The formal legal language continued for several minutes. Matthew detailed revocations of previous wills, appointments of executors, specific bequests of personal items to various friends and employees. My family shifted impatiently in their seats. Jason sighed loudly. Aunt Pam checked her watch. My father drummed his fingers on the table, each tap louder than the last. Finally, Matthew reached the section everyone was waiting for. His voice remained steady, but I noticed his grip tighten slightly on the document. "We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to all cash assets totaling approximately $8 million. Our investment portfolio valued at approximately $12 million. All real estate holdings, including our primary residence, valued at $5 million. and our 25% ownership stake in Alexander Logistics valued at approximately $1 million to our beloved granddaughter, Natalie Grace Foster. The room went completely, utterly silent. I could hear the old clock on the wall ticking, hear someone's phone vibrating in their pocket, hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stopped breathing for a moment, certain I had misheard. $26 million. To me, it couldn't be real. Matthew continued reading, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. We specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son Richard Alexander, our daughter-in-law Diane Alexander, our grandson Jason Alexander, our daughter Pamela Davis, or our son-in-law Stephen Davis, as we have provided for them during our lifetime and have made our reasons clear to our attorney. "Let me see that," my father shouted, his voice exploding into the quiet room. He stood up so abruptly his chair tipped backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. He practically lunged across the table, snatching the document from Matthew's hands with such force the pages crinkled. His eyes scanned frantically, his face going from red to purple as he read. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "This is absolutely insane." They were clearly not in their right minds. No sane person would do this. My mother joined in immediately, her voice shrill and rising with each word. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher? She wouldn't know the first thing about managing that kind of money. She'll lose it all within a year. This is irresponsible. This is cruel to everyone else in this family. Jason slammed his hand on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. What about me? I'm family too. I'm their grandson, their only grandson. I need startup capital for my business ventures. I have ideas that could change the world. That money should be invested in the future, not wasted on someone who's content making $30,000 a year teaching kids their ABCs. Aunt Pam turned to me, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "What did you do, Natalie? How did you manipulate them into this? You were always over there, always whispering in their ears, always playing the sweet granddaughter. You poisoned them against the rest of us. You're a conniving little snake." I sat in shocked silence, unable to process what was happening. The number kept echoing in my head. 26 million. 26 million. It didn't feel real. None of this felt real. Matthew calmly retrieved the will from my father's grip, smoothing the pages carefully. "If you will all please take your seats and calm down. There's more." Harold and Elizabeth recorded a video message to be played at this time. They wanted to explain their decision in their own words. He pressed a button on a remote control, and the large screen on the wall illuminated. My breath caught in my throat. My grandparents appeared, sitting side by side on their living room sofa, the one with the floral pattern that Grandma had reupholstered herself. They looked exactly as they had the last time I visited. Grandpa in his favorite cardigan, Grandma with her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. My heart clenched painfully at seeing them alive, again, moving, breathing, speaking. Grandpa Harold spoke first, his voice strong and clear. "If you're watching this, it means we've passed on. We want to explain our decisions directly to prevent any misunderstandings or false accusations. We made these choices with clear minds and open hearts." Grandma Elizabeth continued, her gentle voice filling the room. "Richard, Pam, we love you as our children. That never changed, not even when we were disappointed by your choices. But we've been deeply disappointed by the values you've embraced and passed to your own children, with the exception of Natalie. We've watched for decades as you prioritized material wealth over relationships, as you treated us as a resource to be tapped rather than as parents to be cherished." For the next several minutes, my grandparents laid out their reasoning with painful honesty. They detailed years of missed family events, requested loans that were never repaid, dismissive attitudes toward their modest lifestyle choices. They talked about my father's demand for a management position he hadn't earned, Jason's endless parade of failed schemes that always required their money, Aunt Pam's resentment that they wouldn't buy her a bigger house. Each example was specific, dated, impossible to deny. "The business we built," Grandpa said, his voice firm but sad, was never about amassing wealth for its own sake. It was about creating security for our family and opportunities for our employees. We built it through hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly. Those values matter more than the money itself. Natalie is the only one who has demonstrated these values consistently, Grandma added, looking directly into the camera as if she could see me. She visits us not because she wants something, but because she genuinely cares. She brings us food, helps us with technology, listens to our stories even though she's heard them 100 times. She chose a career helping children despite the low pay because it fulfills her purpose. She lives simply, finds joy in small things, treats everyone with kindness and respect. We trust Natalie to be a good steward of what we've built, Grandpa continued. She'll honor our legacy and use these resources wisely, not squander them on status symbols or get-rich-quick schemes. She understands that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. The video continued for several more minutes. They expressed hopes for how the inheritance might be used, supporting education, helping the community, continuing their charitable work. They spoke about values, about character, about what really matters in life. As the screen went dark, I realized tears were streaming down my face. They had trusted me with everything, and I had no idea they were even considering it. My father exploded the moment the screen went black. This is absolute garbage, complete and total nonsense. They were clearly senile, confused, manipulated. We'll contest this will. No judge will uphold this insanity. Matthew remained perfectly calm, his hands folded on the table. They anticipated that response, Richard. In fact, they specifically addressed it. They underwent extensive cognitive testing before finalizing this will. Multiple independent doctors certified their competence. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Rodriguez all evaluated them separately and concluded they were of completely sound mind. Additionally, they documented years of behaviors that informed their decision, keeping detailed journals, saving correspondence, recording conversations with permission. I must advise you that contesting this would be extremely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to succeed. My mother's strategy changed immediately, her voice suddenly sweet and pleading. "Honey, sweetheart, Natalie, darling," she cooed, leaning toward me. "You understand this isn't right, don't you? Your grandparents were confused, elderly, not thinking clearly about the consequences. This money belongs to the whole family, not just you. You'll share it with us, won't you? You're a good girl. You wouldn't want to tear this family apart over money." I felt cornered, trapped, all eyes boring into me. "I have to think about this," I stammered, my voice shaking. "I had no idea they were going to do this. I never asked for any of this." "Think about it?" Jason scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "There's nothing to think about. That money should be divided equally among all of us, or, at the very least, managed by someone with actual business experience, someone who understands finance and investment." My father interjected quickly, meaning himself, of course. As the eldest son and someone with decades of business experience, I'm the logical choice to manage these assets properly. The arguing intensified, voices rising, accusations flying. Matthew gently touched my arm, drawing my attention away from the chaos. "You don't have to decide anything today, Natalie," he said quietly. "Take time to process this. My office will handle all immediate matters related to the estate." He handed me a thick manila envelope. "This contains all the relevant documents, keys to their house, contact information for their financial advisors, and instructions they left for you. Call me anytime with questions, day or night." The meeting dissolved into complete chaos after that. Threats of lawsuits, accusations of manipulation, demands for immediate action. Matthew eventually stood and announced firmly that he had another appointment, effectively ending the meeting. As we filed out of the conference room, my father grabbed my arm roughly, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. "This discussion is not over," he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and angry. Come to our house tonight at 6 o'clock. We'll sort this out as a family. His tone made it absolutely clear this wasn't a request or an invitation. It was a command. I nodded numbly, too, overwhelmed to argue, too shocked to think clearly. As they departed in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat in my 10-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot, clutching the envelope, wondering how an inheritance meant to be a blessing had so quickly become a curse. I spent the afternoon driving aimlessly around town, unable to go home, unable to think clearly. The envelope from Matthew sat unopened on my passenger seat. Part of me wanted to tear it open, to understand exactly what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Another part was terrified of the responsibility, of the target it painted on my back, of how it had instantly transformed my family into enemies. At 5:45, I pulled into my parents' driveway, noting that everyone else had already arrived. Their house loomed before me, all 5,000 square feet of granite and glass, designed to impress rather than welcome. Every detail screamed money and status, from the professionally landscaped yard to the three-car garage to the imported Italian tile visible through the front windows. I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and headed inside. They were waiting in the formal living room, a space rarely used except for my mother's social gatherings and important family business. The furniture was uncomfortable and expensive, chosen for appearance rather than comfort. My father stood by the fireplace, a tumbler of expensive scotch in his hand, positioned like he was posing for a portrait. My mother perched on the edge of a designer chair that probably cost more than my car. Jason sprawled across the leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. Aunt Pam paced nervously, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Uncle Steve stood by the window, gazing out as if wishing he could escape. Finally, my father said when I entered, his voice sharp with impatience, "Sit down, Natalie. We need to talk." I chose a chair near the door, suddenly very aware I might need a quick exit. The positioning felt strategic, defensive. "Let's be reasonable about this," my father began, slipping into his business negotiation voice. "Your grandparents clearly weren't thinking straight. They meant for the whole family to benefit, not just you. It's obvious when you think about it logically." My mother nodded enthusiastically, playing her supporting role perfectly. "Sweetheart, managing wealth is incredibly complicated. There are tax implications, investment strategies, legal considerations. Your father has the experience and expertise to handle this properly. You can still get a nice portion, perhaps enough for a down payment on a real house instead of that cramped apartment. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I remained silent, letting them talk themselves deeper into their own trap. Emboldened by my lack of response, my father continued, "Here's what we propose, and I think you'll find it quite generous. You sign over the estate to me as the financial head of this family. I'll ensure everyone gets their fair share based on need and contribution. You'll receive 10%, which is more than generous considering your limited financial needs and lack of experience." 10%. I finally found my voice. That would still be over $2 million. "Exactly!" Jason jumped in, sitting up on the sofa. "More than enough for a teacher. You could buy a house, a new car, never worry about money again. Meanwhile, I need at least $5 million for my cryptocurrency exchange platform. It's going to revolutionize the industry. I have investors lined up, partnerships ready to go. This could turn into billions." I looked at him skeptically. Jason had bounced between get-rich-quick schemes for years, never holding a job longer than 3 months, never finishing anything he started. His last venture, an app for rating public restrooms, had collapsed after burning through $50,000 of my parents' money. Before that, it was a subscription box for artisanal beef jerky, a social network for pet owners, and a cryptocurrency mining operation that never mined a single coin. "The house should obviously go to us," Aunt Pam interjected, stopping her pacing to face me directly. "We have 3 children to consider, 3 futures to plan for. That neighborhood would give them access to better schools, better opportunities. Your grandparents would want their great-grandchildren to benefit." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Aunt Pam had never once visited my grandparents in that house, not in the 15 years they had lived there. Her children, my cousins, were complete strangers to me. We had met maybe 5 times in our entire lives. They sent obligatory birthday cards with my aunt's handwriting, generic messages that could have been written to anyone. As the evening progressed, their tactics evolved and shifted. When demands didn't work, they switched to guilt, to emotional manipulation that would have worked on a younger, more uncertain version of myself. "After all we've done for you," my mother said, her eyes becoming dramatically moist, her voice quavering. "We gave you life, a good home, opportunities. We paid for your education, bought you clothes, fed you. This is how you repay family loyalty? By hoarding money that should benefit everyone?" I nearly choked on the water I was drinking. Loyalty? When was the last time either of you called just to check on me? When did you ever attend one of my school performances? When did you show up for anything that mattered to me? My father changed strategies again, his voice hardening, becoming threatening. "We're not asking, Natalie. We're telling you what's going to happen. Either you sign the transfer documents voluntarily, or we contest the will. We'll bring up every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How often did you visit them alone? What did you tell them about us when we weren't there? What promises did you make? What lies did you tell? We'll paint a picture of manipulation and undue influence. It will get ugly, expensive, and very public. Is that really what you want?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning, but something inside me hardened. A memory surfaced of my grandfather teaching me to stand my ground during a playground dispute when I was 8 years old. A bigger kid had tried to take my lunch money, and I had wanted to just give it to him to avoid conflict. But Grandpa had knelt down, looked me in the eyes, and said something I never forgot. "No one can take your dignity unless you give it away, Natalie. Know what's right and hold firm. Stand your ground not with anger, but with quiet strength. Don't let bullies win, whether they're on the playground or in boardrooms or even in your own family." Uncle Steve, who had remained completely silent until now, suddenly spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. "Maybe we should all calm down and give Natalie some time to think. This is a lot to process. It's only been a few weeks since they died. We're all grieving." My father rounded on him instantly, his face red with fury. "Stay out of this, Steve. This is family business. You married into this family. You don't get a vote. I am family." Uncle Steve responded quietly. But he immediately retreated when my father glared at him, shrinking back into his corner by the window. As the clock ticked past 9, Jason started drafting transfer paperwork on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. My mother called their personal attorney for advice on the wording, speaking in hushed tones in the corner. Aunt Pam scrolled through real estate listings for my grandparents' house on her phone, talking loudly about which walls she would knock down first, how she would renovate the kitchen, what the property could be worth if they added a pool. They had already divided my inheritance without my consent, mapping out how they would spend every single dollar. Not once did anyone mention my grandparents' wishes or legacy. Not once did they ask what I thought should be done with the money. Not once did they consider that maybe, just maybe, my grandparents had good reasons for their decision. At 10:30, my father printed out the crude transfer document and slid it across the coffee table to me along with a pen. The paper felt heavy in my hands, weighted with consequences. "Sign it," he demanded, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "Now. We've wasted enough time on this nonsense." I picked up the paper and read it carefully, taking my time despite my father's impatient sighs. The language was broad and sweeping, essentially signing away all my rights to anything my grandparents had left me. In exchange, I would receive a percentage to be determined later at my father's sole discretion. There was no guarantee, no specific amount, no protection for me whatsoever. I put the paper down carefully and took a deep breath. The room went completely silent. Every eye was on me. "No," I said clearly. "What did you just say?" my father asked, his voice dangerously low, a warning. I said, "No, I won't sign this or anything like it. My grandparents trusted me with their legacy for a reason. I intend to honor that trust. My mother launched into an immediate tirade about ingratitude, about selfishness, about how I was tearing the family apart. Jason called me names I won't repeat, his face twisted with anger and entitlement. Aunt Pam began sobbing dramatically about her children's future, about opportunities lost, about family bonds destroyed. Through it all, I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight. The word no had become a shield around me, protecting me from their manipulation and threats. Finally, my father slammed his glass down on the side table so hard it cracked, scotch splashing onto the expensive wood. "That's enough," he roared, his voice filling the entire room. "I always told Dad you weren't to be trusted. You manipulated them just like you're trying to manipulate us now with this innocent act, this sweet granddaughter routine." He stalked toward me, pointing his finger inches from my face, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You have a choice to make right now, Natalie. Either you sign that paper and remain part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. You cannot have both. Choose." The ultimatum hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I looked around at the faces of my family members, searching desperately for any sign of love or understanding, any indication that family meant more than money. I found none. My mother's face was cold and calculating. Jason looked at me with pure contempt. Aunt Pam had stopped her fake crying and was watching with predatory interest. Uncle Steve wouldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I realized a painful but necessary truth. They had never really seen me as family. I was just a means to an end, a potential source of money, a pawn in their endless game of acquisition and status. The love I had hoped for, had spent my whole life trying to earn, simply didn't exist. "I'm not signing," I said firmly, standing up and facing my father directly. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I have to respect what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. They knew what they were doing." "Then get out of my house," my father snarled, his face purple with rage. "Pack your things and leave tonight. You're no longer welcome here. You're no longer part of this family." "I live in my own apartment," I reminded him, confused. "I have for years. I haven't lived here since college." He laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent chills down my spine. "The apartment we co-signed for because your pathetic teacher salary couldn't qualify for the lease. Check your rental agreement, Natalie. We own that building through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease terminated effective immediately." My stomach dropped as the realization hit. When I had applied for my apartment 5 years ago, I couldn't qualify on my own. The landlord required proof of income at 3 times the monthly rent, and my teacher's salary fell short. My parents had offered to help, to co-sign the lease. I never realized they actually owned the entire building through a shell corporation, that they had that kind of leverage over me. "You have 30 minutes to pack essential items," my mother said, checking her expensive watch with exaggerated precision. "The locks will be changed first thing tomorrow morning. Security will be notified that you're no longer authorized to enter the premises." I stood frozen in complete shock. They were actually doing this. They were making me homeless, kicking me out with nowhere to go, all over money they had never earned, had no right to, had done nothing to deserve. "The clock's ticking," Jason smirked, clearly enjoying my distress. "Better hurry, sis. Those $26 million won't keep you warm tonight when you're sleeping in your car." 30 minutes is not long to pack up your life, to sort through years of possessions and memories and decide what's essential. I moved on autopilot, my mind spinning with disbelief and hurt. How could they do this? How could money turn my family into complete strangers capable of such cruelty? My father stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed, watching me like a prison guard ensuring an inmate didn't steal anything during transfer. My mother stayed downstairs, already on the phone with a real estate agent about selling my grandparents' house. Her voice carried up the stairs, discussing market values and commission rates and the fastest possible sale. "You were never really part of this family anyway," my father said coldly, as I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. "Your mother and I were going to divorce before she got pregnant with you. You were the obligation that kept us together, the anchor that prevented us from living the lives we actually wanted. The casual cruelty of his revelations staggered me. I had always sensed I was unwanted, felt it in the emotional distance and lack of interest. But having it confirmed so bluntly, stated as simple fact without even a hint of regret, was another matter entirely. "We've wasted enough time and money on you," my mother added, appearing in the doorway beside my father. "Your private school tuition, braces, summer camps, all those dance lessons you were terrible at. Tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Consider this the end of our investment. Time to cut our losses." Investment. Not love, not care, not family bonds. Investment. As if I were a stock that had performed poorly, a business venture that hadn't provided adequate returns. Jason appeared next, leaning against the wall with that smug expression I had grown to hate. "You'll regret this when you have nothing and no one," he said confidently. "That money will run out. Faster than you think. You'll make stupid decisions, get taken advantage of, lose it all. And then what? You'll come crawling back begging for help. And we'll remember how you chose cash over family." I zipped up my final bag, fighting back tears with everything I had. I was determined not to cry in front of them, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. "Is that everything?" my father demanded impatiently. "We'd like to lock up and go to bed. It's late." I looked around the room that had been mine since childhood, though I had only stayed here occasionally since college. The ballet trophies from elementary school sat on a shelf, gathering dust. My framed high school diploma hung on the wall. The bookshelf was filled with novels and textbooks from my education years. Photo albums documented a childhood that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. "I can come back for the rest later," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My father laughed, that same cruel sound. "There won't be a later. Whatever you leave tonight goes to charity or the trash tomorrow morning. Your call. Choose wisely." The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. They were erasing me from their lives completely, removing every trace of my existence, all because I wouldn't give them money they had done absolutely nothing to earn. I grabbed my grandmother's quilt from the bed, the one she had made for me when I was 10, hand-stitched over 2 years with fabric from dresses she had worn and curtains from their old house. I stuffed it into my already overflowing bag. I would not leave that behind. With 3 bags slung over my shoulders and another clutched in my hand, I made my way downstairs. No one offered to help. They just watched me struggle, waiting for me to leave so they could get on with their evening. At the front door, I turned around one last time. My family stood in a line like some twisted receiving line, faces set in various expressions of anger, disappointment, and smug satisfaction. "You might have money now," my mother said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But family is forever. You'll realize what you've thrown away. You'll understand too late that you made the wrong choice." "I'm not the one throwing away family," I replied quietly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "You are. You're the ones who chose money over relationship. I'm just honoring the wishes of 2 people who actually loved me." With that, I walked out the door and into the cool night air. The door slammed behind me with disturbing finality, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Standing beside my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt the full weight of everything crashing down on me like a physical force. I was effectively homeless. My apartment was no longer mine. My family had disowned me completely. In the span of a few hours, I had gained millions, but lost the only support system I had ever known, flawed and conditional as it had always been. I sat in my car and finally allowed the tears to come, tears I'd been holding back for hours. They streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. Great heaving sobs shook my whole body, years of disappointment and hurt and loneliness pouring out. I cried for my grandparents, whose absence felt more acute than ever. I cried for the family I had always hoped for but never truly had. Mostly, I cried for myself, suddenly adrift in a world that had completely changed in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, I wiped my eyes and started the car. I had nowhere to go. Hotels required credit cards with available limits, and mine was maxed out from textbooks and classroom supplies. Friends were an option, but explaining this impossible situation seemed beyond me at nearly midnight. Then I remembered the envelope Matthew had given me. Pulling it out with shaking hands, I found a set of keys attached to a familiar rabbit-shaped keychain, the one my grandmother had cherished for decades. These were the keys to my grandparents' house, the house that was now, unbelievably, impossibly, mine. The drive to their neighborhood took 20 minutes through empty streets. With each mile, I felt simultaneously pulled toward the comfort of their home and terrified of entering it without them there to greet me. I had avoided the house completely since the funeral, unable to face the emptiness, the silence, the absence of the two people who had made it a home. The porch light was on when I arrived, probably on a timer my grandfather had set years ago and never changed. I sat in the driveway for several long minutes, gathering courage, trying to prepare myself for what I would find inside. Finally, I grabbed one bag and approached the front door. The key shook in my hand as I inserted it into the lock. The door opened smoothly, well-oiled hinges silent. I stepped inside and flipped on the lights. The house smelled exactly the same, a mixture of my grandmother's lemon verbena potpourri and the wood polish my grandfather used on the furniture every Sunday morning without fail. I half expected to hear their voices calling a greeting from the kitchen, to see Grandpa in his recliner reading the newspaper, Grandma in the kitchen preparing something delicious. The silence was deafening, oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I made my way to the guest room I had always used during my visits, dropping my bag on the bed. Everything was exactly as I had left it after my last weekend visit a month before the accident. The novel I had been reading still sat on the nightstand, a bookmark indicating my progress 3/4 through. Fresh towels were folded neatly on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother in anticipation of my next stay that would never come the way we had planned. The thoughtfulness of it, the expectation of continuity they couldn't have known would be broken, undid me completely. I sank onto the bed and cried until exhaustion overtook me, falling asleep fully clothed on top of the covers, my grandmother's quilt clutched to my chest. Morning came with disorienting brightness, streaming through the curtains I had forgotten to close. For a brief, beautiful moment, I expected to smell coffee brewing downstairs and hear my grandfather's off-key whistling as he made breakfast. Reality crashed back immediately. They were gone. Somehow I had inherited both their fortune and their enemies, all in the form of my own family. My phone had blown up overnight with texts and missed calls. Most were from my father and mother, messages alternating between threats and sudden attempts at reconciliation that were transparent in their desperation. "We can work this out, if you'll be reasonable," read one message from my mother sent at 2 in the morning. "Family should stay together. Let's talk calmly about a fair solution." My father was characteristically less subtle. "You have 24 hours to reconsider before we file suit. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about what you're throwing away." Jason sent a single text that made my blood run cold. "Enjoying the big empty house? Not for long. Better watch your back, sis." That last message sounded like a genuine threat, not just bluster and empty words. I forwarded it immediately to Matthew, who responded within minutes despite the early hour. "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else. Lock all entrances." His urgency both alarmed me and provided strange comfort. At least someone was on my side in this nightmare. Matthew arrived exactly 30 minutes later, pulling up in a sensible sedan. He was carrying a briefcase and a cardboard drink carrier, with 2 coffees from the local cafe my grandparents had loved. I ushered him into the kitchen where we sat at the breakfast nook my grandparents had used for casual meals and long conversations. "First things first," he said, sliding a coffee toward me across the worn wooden table. "Your family has already contacted 3 different attorneys about contesting the will. I anticipated this exact scenario and have prepared countermeasures. Your grandparents were nothing if not thorough in their planning." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. They kicked me out last night. My father apparently owns my apartment building through some investment company. I had no idea. They gave me 30 minutes to pack and said the locks would be changed today. Matthew nodded grimly, unsurprised. Typical Richard tactics, using financial leverage to force compliance, to maintain control. He began pulling documents from his briefcase with practiced efficiency. What he didn't tell you, what he doesn't know, is that your grandparents provided for this exact scenario years ago. He showed me a deed to a small cottage about 20 minutes outside town, a property I had never heard of or seen. Your grandmother bought this property 5 years ago as an investment, but she kept it in a separate trust specifically for you. Richard doesn't know about it. Your parents don't know about it. You have somewhere safe to go if you need it, somewhere they can't touch or threaten. Relief washed over me in waves. At least I wouldn't be homeless. Wouldn't be sleeping in my car or imposing on friends who couldn't possibly understand the situation. There's something else you should know, Matthew continued, his expression softening. You're not alone in this fight. Your grandparents had many loyal friends and associates who understood the situation with your family. They built a community over decades, and that community is ready to support you. As if on cue, a knock sounded at the back door. Matthew smiled slightly. That would be Carlos. He's been waiting to talk to you. Carlos. The name was vaguely familiar, mentioned in passing during visits, but never someone I had met directly. Carlos Ramirez, Matthew explained, standing to answer the door. He's been your grandparents' estate manager and handyman for 15 years. He lives in the guest house at the back of the property. He's the one who's been maintaining everything since their death. I answered the door to find a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, kind brown eyes, and weathered hands that spoke of years of hard work. He held his hat respectfully, his expression warm but sad. Miss Natalie, he said, his voice gentle with a slight accent. I'm very sorry about your grandparents. They were wonderful people, the best employers I ever had. I saw your car this morning and wanted to check if you needed anything. Mr. Harold and Mrs. Elizabeth, they told me to look after you if anything ever happened to them. The simple kindness, the genuine concern from someone who was essentially a stranger, nearly brought me to tears again. Thank you, Carlos. I'm honestly a bit overwhelmed by everything. Carlos nodded with understanding. I can imagine. Your family, they came here after the funeral when no one was around. They took things, watches, jewelry, some electronics. I have it all on the security cameras. Mr. Harold had me update the system last year. He didn't trust the old one your father installed, said it had too many blind spots, too many ways for someone to avoid being recorded. My stomach clenched. My father had installed an extensive security system for my grandparents several years ago, supposedly for their protection. I had completely forgotten about the cameras, assumed they were just for show or basic security. Matthew made a note in his legal pad. That footage could be very useful if they pursue legal action. Evidence of theft, of their true character and intentions. There's more, Carlos continued, his expression becoming more serious. Mrs. Elizabeth kept detailed journals. She documented everything, especially family visits and interactions. She was very organized, very thorough. They're in her study if you want to see them. I followed Carlos through the familiar house to my grandmother's small study off the main hallway. A built-in bookcase held dozens of leather-bound journals, each meticulously dated in her elegant handwriting. Carlos pulled one from the shelf and handed it to me carefully. This one mentions when your father asked for money last year, he said quietly, for some investment opportunity that sounded suspicious to them. I opened the journal, immediately recognizing my grandmother's handwriting, the careful loops and precise letters. The entry was dated May 15th of the previous year. May 15th. Richard visited today. First time in 7 months. Didn't ask about our health or our lives. Didn't inquire about the business or express any interest in how we were doing. Immediately launched into a pitch about a cryptocurrency investment requiring $250,000. When Harold refused, explaining we don't invest in things we don't understand, Richard became hostile and aggressive. He accused us of preferring Natalie, of being naive and foolish, of not understanding modern finance. He said we were wasting our money on outdated investments when we could be making millions. He even suggested that Natalie only visits to secure her inheritance, that she's playing us for fools. Could not be more wrong about her. Natalie has never asked for money, never hinted at wanting anything. She has no idea of our true net worth. She brings food every Sunday, helps with technology, stays to eat with us and talk for hours. She asks about our lives, our memories, our thoughts. Richard left without finishing his coffee, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Harold was very upset afterward, didn't speak for an hour. I read entry after entry, each one documenting years of similar interactions. My father demanding money for various schemes. My brother pitching absurd business ideas with no research or planning. My mother making thinly veiled comments about their modest lifestyle being embarrassing to her social standing, suggesting they should live in a bigger house in a better neighborhood. In stark contrast, my visits were described with genuine warmth and affection. My grandmother noted small gifts I had brought, flowers from the farmer's market, homemade cookies, books I thought they would enjoy. She wrote about conversations we shared, my concerns about students, my excitement about lesson plans, my questions about their youth and their experiences. She documented help I offered around the house, fixing their computer, updating their phones, helping with yard work. She saw me in a way my parents never had, recognizing my character and my heart. As I read, the doorbell rang. Carlos went to answer it, returning with an older woman in a practical dress and cardigan, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Dorothy. Reynolds, he introduced her. Your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. She wanted to be here this morning to support you. Dorothy hugged me tightly, smelling of lavender and vanilla. You look just like Elizabeth when she was young, she said, her eyes misty. She was so proud of you. Talked about you constantly. She kept every card you ever sent, every drawing you made as a child. She showed me photos from your classroom, told me about your students. You were the light of their lives. Over the next several hours, more people arrived, each one bringing not only information, but genuine affection and support. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner who had worked with them for 25 years, arrived with comprehensive files about Alexander Logistics. She knew every detail of the company and offered to guide me through understanding the business, its operations, its culture, its future potential. George Patel, their investment advisor for over 2 decades, brought detailed portfolios showing exactly how my inheritance was structured, where every dollar was invested, what the growth projections look like. He explained complex financial concepts in ways I could understand, patient and thorough. Sarah Johnson, their neighbor for 30 years, arrived with a homemade casserole and stories about neighborhood gatherings I had attended as a child, memories I had forgotten. She talked about how my grandparents had helped her through her husband's death, how they had been there for everyone on the street who needed support. Each person who arrived brought not only practical help, but genuine love for my grandparents. They had all known my grandparents as more than wealthy business owners. They knew them as kind, generous, thoughtful people who treated everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their position or status. While Dorothy helped me go through my grandmother's desk, she found a hidden compartment containing letters from my father spanning decades. Each one requested money, some with thinly veiled threats about cutting off access to me if they refused. The progression was disturbing, showing how his demands had escalated over time, how his entitlement had grown. She also kept this, Dorothy said quietly, handing me a USB drive. Security footage from after the funeral. Your mother was going through Elizabeth's jewelry before the reception even started, before people had finished offering condolences. She took several valuable pieces, antique items that had been in the family for generations. She claimed Elizabeth would have wanted her to have them, that it was understood. My grandparents, it seemed, had been documenting my family's behavior for years, perhaps decades. They had known this day would come, had prepared not just a financial safety net for me, but a complete support system. They had created evidence that would protect their wishes, relationships that would guide me, and a community that would stand with me against whatever challenges arose. Around 4 in the afternoon, as Matthew was guiding me through complex financial documents and explaining my responsibilities as the estate executor, my phone pinged with a text from Jason. The message was brief but chilling. Hope you're enjoying Grandma and Grandpa's house while you can. Dad, Mom, Aunt Pam, Uncle Steve, and I are coming over tomorrow morning at 10 to collect what rightfully belongs to us. Better not try to stop us or things will get ugly. We're done playing nice. I showed the message to Matthew immediately. His expression darkened as he read it, his jaw tightening. Threats and potential breaking and entering, he muttered, already pulling out his phone. I think it's time to activate the final part of your grandparents' plan. They knew this confrontation would come. They prepared for it meticulously. He made several phone calls in quick succession, speaking cryptically about meetings, evidence, and strategic positioning. When he finished, he turned to me with a determined expression. Your grandparents anticipated this exact scenario, Natalie. They knew Richard and the others wouldn't accept their decision peacefully. They prepared for confrontation, for threats, for attempts to intimidate you. Tomorrow morning will be ready for them. But tonight, I suggest you review these materials so you understand exactly what you're fighting for, what legacy you're protecting. He gestured to the pile of journals, financial documents, legal papers, and personal letters spread across the dining room table. Your grandparents built more than just wealth. They built relationships based on trust and respect. They created a business that treats employees fairly. They supported their community quietly and consistently. That's their true legacy to you. Not just the money, but the values and the vision behind it. As everyone except Carlos left for the evening, each promising to return the next morning for the confrontation, I felt a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't alone in this fight. My grandparents had ensured that, had given me not just their money, but their wisdom, their community, their carefully constructed defense against the very scenario that was unfolding. I spent the evening reading through journals and financial reports, getting to know my grandparents in a completely new way. They had been strategic, thoughtful, and meticulous in their planning. Everything they had done was deliberate and intentional, including their choice of heir. They had seen my character, recognized my values, trusted me with their life's work. For the first time since the will reading, I felt equal to the responsibility they had entrusted to me. I wouldn't let them down. I would honor their legacy, protect what they had built, and use their resources the way they would have wanted. As I prepared for bed in the guest room that was slowly becoming my room, another text came through from Jason, his words dripping with menace. Better sleep with one eye open, sis. Tomorrow you'll see what happens to people who steal from this family. You think you're so smart, so special. You're about to learn a very painful lesson. Instead of fear, I felt resolve hardening within me like steel. Tomorrow would indeed show what happens when people try to steal from family, when people choose greed over love, when people reveal their true colors, but not in the way Jason imagined, not at all in the way any of them expected. I woke early the next morning, anxious but determined, ready for whatever was coming. By 8, Matthew had arrived with coffee, pastries from the bakery my grandparents loved, and a thick folder of legal documents. These are restraining orders ready to be filed if necessary, he explained, laying out papers on the kitchen table. And these are cease and desist letters addressing the specific threats Jason made. Everything is prepared. We're ready. Dorothy arrived next, immediately taking over the kitchen to prepare a proper breakfast. The familiar smells of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee filled the house, providing strange comfort before the coming storm, making the house feel lived in and warm again. By 9:30, the house had filled with supporters, with people who had loved my grandparents and were determined to protect their legacy. Carlos positioned himself by the front door, a silent guardian with crossed arms. Rosa Martinez set up her laptop at the dining table, ready to present financial evidence if needed. George Patel organized his investment portfolios. Dorothy bustled around ensuring everyone had coffee and food, her presence alone a connection to my grandparents' hospitality and warmth. At 9:45, cars began pulling into the long driveway. First came my father's black luxury sedan, gleaming in the morning sun. Then my mother's white SUV, spotless and expensive. Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve arrived in their midlife crisis red convertible. Finally, Jason pulled up in his impractical sports car that he could only afford because my parents paid his rent and most of his other expenses. "They're early," Matthew observed calmly, checking his watch, trying to catch us off guard, to throw us off balance. Classic intimidation tactic. As the doorbell rang aggressively, followed by pounding that echoed through the house, Matthew nodded to Carlos, who opened the door with practiced calm. My father stood on the threshold, momentarily surprised to see someone other than me answering. Behind him, the rest of my family clustered together, expressions ranging from angry to smug to uncertain. "Where's Natalie?" my father demanded, trying to peer past Carlos into the house. "This is private family business. We don't need an audience." Carlos remained completely immovable, his presence solid and reassuring. "Miss Natalie is expecting you. Please come in." My family filed into the foyer, stopping short when they saw the gathering in the living room. I stood in the center, Matthew slightly behind me to my right, a position of support and legal authority. The room was filled with people, with witnesses, with my grandparents' true family. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice brittle with surprise and anger. "You brought outsiders into a private family matter? This is inappropriate. This is manipulation." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. 3 more people entered, and I watched my father's face go pale. First came Judge Robert Henderson, a tall, dignified man in his 70s, who had been my grandparents' friend for decades. He was followed by Police Chief Maria Williams, whose daughter's education had been supported by my grandparents' charitable foundation. Last came Thomas Jang, my grandparents' financial advisor for over 20 years, carrying a briefcase full of documentation. My father's face paled dramatically at the sight of Judge Henderson. The judge had ruled against him in a business dispute years earlier, a case my father had tried unsuccessfully to influence through social connections and implied threats. "Robert," my father said, attempting a jovial tone that fell completely flat. "What brings you here? This is just a family discussion." The judge's expression remained stern and professional. "I'm here at the request of Harold and Elizabeth Alexander through their attorney, Matthew Goldstein. They asked me, in the event of their deaths, to serve as an impartial witness to any family disputes regarding their estate. They anticipated this exact situation." My mother turned to Chief Williams, her voice sharp with accusation. "This is ridiculous. We're here to collect family heirlooms that rightfully belong to us, items with sentimental value. Why is law enforcement present? Are you trying to intimidate us?" The chief smiled thinly, her expression professional but knowing. "I'm here as a friend of the Alexander family, Mrs. Alexander, not in an official capacity. Unless, of course, someone commits a crime, in which case my official duties would naturally take precedence. I'm sure everyone will behave appropriately." The implied threat was not lost on anyone in the room. The atmosphere shifted, tension crackling like electricity. As if perfectly choreographed, the back door opened and 6 more people entered, forming a protective semicircle behind me. They were longtime employees from my grandparents' business, people who had known my father since childhood, who had witnessed his transformation from entitled son to absent family member. "You've got to be kidding me," Jason muttered, his confidence visibly shaking. "Is this supposed to intimidate us? Because it's not working." I stepped forward, finding strength in the support surrounding me, in the community my grandparents had built. "I know exactly why you're here. You believe you're entitled to my grandparents' estate despite their explicit wishes, despite years of neglect and manipulation. You think you can bully or threaten me into giving you what you want. You're wrong." My father's face hardened, his mask of civility dropping completely. Those old fools were manipulated by you. We're simply here to correct that injustice, to restore proper order to this family." From behind me, Thomas Jang spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Actually, Richard, I have documentation of every attempt you made to access your parents' assets over the last 20 years. Every request, every demand, every threat." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This includes the unauthorized transfer attempt from their retirement account in 2016, when you tried to forge their signatures, the forged check incident in 2018 that they chose not to prosecute because you're their son, your attempt to have Elizabeth declared incompetent last year after she refused to fund Jason's failed cryptocurrency venture. Every single incident is documented with dates, amounts, and evidence." My father's face went from pale to red. "That's all taken out of context. Those were misunderstandings, miscommunications." Rosa Martinez stepped forward next, her tablet in hand. "I also have records of the company loan you never repaid, Richard. $200,000 borrowed in 2012 for your vacation home in Aspen. Your parents never pursued repayment because you're their son, because they loved you despite everything. But the debt exists, it's documented. You signed papers. One by one, my grandparents' friends and associates presented evidence of my family's behavior over the years. Each example was specific, dated, documented, impossible to deny. The pattern was clear and damning. Years of taking, demanding, manipulating, with minimal involvement in my grandparents' actual lives. Aunt Pam, who had been quietly fuming, suddenly turned on me, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little snake! You turned our parents against us with your lies and manipulation. You poisoned them against their own children." Judge Henderson cleared his throat, his voice carrying authority. "Actually, Mrs. Davis, I personally reviewed the video journals Elizabeth kept over the last 5 years. There was no external influence, no manipulation. Your parents were quite clear and consistent about their reasoning. Their decision was based on decades of observation and experience." "This is all very theatrical," my mother said dismissively, trying to regain control. "But it changes nothing fundamentally. We will contest the will. We have resources, we will win." Matthew stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. "I have prepared documentation for you all." He handed each family member a thick envelope. "This includes banking records, text messages, emails, and video evidence of your interactions with Harold and Elizabeth over the past decade. All of it would become public record if you contest the will. I strongly encourage you to review it carefully before making any decisions about legal action, Uncle." Steve, who had remained silent until now, opened his envelope immediately and began reading. His face grew increasingly pale with each page. After a long moment, he touched Aunt Pam's arm gently. "We should go," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "This isn't a fight we can win. This isn't right." She shrugged him off angrily, but I noticed her confidence had wavered. "My father isn't giving up so easily," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. My father, however, had gone very still after scanning the contents of his envelope. There were records of business dealings he had clearly hoped would remain private forever, along with transcripts of cruel comments he had made about his parents when he thought no one was listening. Chief Williams stepped forward, her presence commanding. "I should also mention that this property is under 24-hour security surveillance. Any attempt to remove items without explicit permission would constitute theft. We take that very seriously in this jurisdiction." Carlos nodded in agreement. "The new system records everything inside and out, all backed up to secure cloud storage in real time. Nothing can be deleted or tampered with." As my family absorbed the implications, the reality of their situation, I walked to the sideboard and picked up a stack of documents Matthew had prepared. "These are cease and desist orders regarding the threats you've made," I said, passing them to Jason. His hands shook slightly as he took them. "These," I continued, handing papers to my father, "are notices that I'm aware of the items taken from this house after the funeral. I expect their immediate return within 72 hours, or I will pursue legal action for theft." My mother began to protest, her mouth opening, but I cut her off firmly. "And these," I said, giving her the final document, are the terms under which I'm willing to maintain any relationship with you all going forward. They include respect for my grandparents' wishes, an end to all attempts to contest the will, and genuine efforts to understand why they made the choices they did. The room fell silent as my family realized the position they were in. Not only had my grandparents legally protected their decisions with extensive documentation, but they had anticipated and prepared for every possible challenge. The community of support they had built stood firmly with me, presenting a united front my family had not expected and could not overcome. My father was the first to break, his shoulders sagging. "This isn't over," he said, but the defeat in his voice suggested otherwise. "We'll review these documents with our attorneys." "Actually, Richard, it is over," Judge Henderson replied firmly. "Your parents were meticulous in their planning, thorough in their documentation. Any judge in this county would uphold their wishes based on the evidence they compiled. Contesting would be expensive, public, and ultimately unsuccessful. I'm telling you this as someone who has known you since you were a child. Accept their decision with grace." One by one, my family members retreated toward the door, their threats dissolving, their confidence crumbling in the face of overwhelming evidence. Jason glared at me as he passed, trying to maintain some semblance of defiance. "This isn't the end," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps not," I replied calmly, meeting his eyes. "But it's the end of you taking advantage of this family, of you expecting something for nothing. My grandparents saw exactly who you really are. That's why we're all here today." As they filed out to their cars, the tension in the room dissipated like fog in sunlight. Dorothy immediately began serving fresh coffee and pastries, as if to cleanse the space of negative energy. The others gathered around, offering congratulations and support, genuine smiles replacing the earlier tension. I felt strangely empty, neither triumphant nor devastated. I had stood my ground, protected my grandparents' wishes, honored their legacy. But I had lost what remained of my family in the process. The victory felt hollow somehow. Judge Henderson seemed to sense my internal conflict. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, his touch paternal and warm. "Your grandparents would be very proud, Natalie, not just of what you did today, but how you did it. With dignity, with principle, with grace under pressure." Rosa nodded in agreement, her eyes kind. "You're more like them than anyone else in the family. That's exactly why they trusted you with everything they built." As my family's cars disappeared down the driveway, I realized I had crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. The family I had known, flawed and conditional as it had always been, was gone completely. But in their place stood a community bound by genuine respect and shared values. The true legacy my grandparents had built over a lifetime of treating people with kindness and fairness. It wasn't the family I was born into, but perhaps it was the family I was meant to have all along.